All right, what's going on, guys? So today we're talking about those new pesky rules announced by the FAA on remote ID and some other cool things that they also announced. So let's jump right in. What does that mean for us as drone pilots? Well, it doesn't mean a whole lot right now. These rules won't go into effect for 30 months for drone pilots after the official rule goes into place, which will be sometime next month. Also, what that means is if your drone is less than 0.55 pounds, 250 grams, then remote ID does not apply to you. So if you have a Mavic Mini and a Mavic Mini 2, then you don't need remote ID. Basically, the way the rule will apply is if you have to register it, then you need remote ID. So remote ID would also include Part 107 operations. So anytime you're flying commercially, even with a drone such as the Mavic Mini or the Mini 2, you're still going to be subject to the remote ID rules. There's going to be 3 different ways that you can fly your drone. One of them is with remote ID built into it, such as a new Mavic that comes out with remote ID built into it. Another way will be with a remote ID module, which old legacy drones will be able to be retrofitted with remote ID modules so that they can have remote ID. And then the last way will be in what are called FAA recognized identification areas, FRIAs, F-R-I-A. The FAA will be taking applications for FRIAs in 18 months. So you'll see that from like maybe schools or community-based organizations. In the short term, the remote ID isn't going to have a big effect on us. It's going to affect manufacturers. They're going to have 18 months to come into compliance with remote ID. And the funny thing is the FAA hasn't exactly quantified remote ID yet. It's not a specific band, it's not a specific Wi-Fi, it's not a specific Bluetooth. Basically, the way the FAA rolls this out is they're going to leave it up to the manufacturers and the community to come up with these new rules and stuff, and then they're going to decide whether they like them or not. It's kind of funny. I'm thinking it's going to be pretty easy to implement on legacy drones. You're probably going to see a device that you can mount to it, and what you'll have to do is just register the serial ID on that remote ID module to your FAA account, the FAA Drone Zone website. Broadcast via either Bluetooth or Wi-Fi, like I said, and it's going to have serial number of the module, latitude, longitude, altitude, and velocity of the drone, as well as the location of the takeoff point and the time. So one thing of the note is that most personal wireless devices are going to be able to accept this remote ID, so that kind of information will be readily available to the people around us. There's no like maximum distance or minimum distance that remote ID needs to broadcast to. It's just basically manufacturers have to make it the most they possibly can. If you are a Part 107 pilot, you're going to need to have your certificate on you, and most law enforcement officers are going to be able to ask you for that. Now, with that said, there are some really good things that came with this announcement yesterday. So one of the things that they announced was the implementation of the ability to fly over people and over cars without a waiver, and also to fly at night without a waiver, which is great. You'll be able to get night flight very easy. They're going to have online training, which in addition to that, they've gone away with the 2 years for Part 107 certificate holders. Every 2 years, they'd have to go to a physical location and retest. Now all they have to do is recurrent training. And part of that training will be night flight training, which once you have the night flight training, you'll be able to fly at night with an anti-collision strobe, something like you find here on the Mavic Mini. So you have 360-degree coverage of the drone for anti-collision. I'm working on a anti-collision mount for the top, so look for that. We may even see full integration of anti-collision lighting into drones moving forward. I'd say that's probably one of the most exciting things about these rules, and a lot of people look at them negatively, but the exciting thing here is the FAA is forcing manufacturers, putting the burden on the manufacturer. Now, I know a lot of us don't like these rules because of Big Brother, but it's going to force the manufacturers to come up with new ideas. What is the saying that necessity is the mother of all invention? So now we're going to see, some new cool ways of implementing remote ID, and also night flights. Still need to meet the night flight requirements by having anti-collision lighting, and also lighting to determine the orientation and altitude of the aircraft, and that'll be part of that additional training for Part 107 certificate holders. Going on to flying over people, so again, you need to be Part 107 in order to do this. There's going to be 4 categories of drones. So the first one being category 1, which is the least restrictive and would be perfect for something like this Mavic Mini. But part of it is it has to weigh less than 0.55 pounds, 250 grams. But also it cannot have rotors that are exposed. It can't have any exposed moving parts like these rotors. So putting, like, say, a shroud over this may bring it into compliance, but it also may not. The verbiage is very vague in the sense that, again, the FAA is putting the requirements out there. It's like they're going, okay, here's the goal. You guys figure out how to get to the goal. We're just telling you what the goal is, which is to have no parts that lacerate human flesh. So having a shroud over that would work, or a ducted fan like in some of the Cinewhoop drones. But the problem is it still needs to be under 250 grams. So expect to see the Mini 3 sometime in the next year, which will be in compliance with both those rules. It'll weigh less than 250 grams and have some kind of shrouded propellers, so it meets that other requirement. So right now, there is no like commercially available DJI or Autel drone that would meet category 1 requirements. Now there probably are some Cine drones and stuff, but the last caveat, the last requirement to category 1 is going to be remote ID. So you have to have a remote ID module in order to meet that requirement in Cat 1. In any Cat, in Cat 1, 2, 3, and 4, all of them require remote ID modules or remote ID built into it. So moving on from Cat 1 to Cat 2. Cat 2 basically it's anything over 0.55 pounds, but also only creates 11 foot-pounds of kinetic force when it strikes something, which that's, again, kind of vague. The FAA is leaving it up to the community and manufacturers to come up with their own testing methods that comply with what their end goal is, and that this does not cause an injury, does not sustain an injury greater than what 11 foot-pounds of kinetic energy would. And then same thing, also remote ID would be required. And moving on to Cat 3. So Cat 3 is 25 foot-pounds of kinetic energy. Also, because it's a higher kinetic energy, if you wanted to fly this over people, it would have to be in an enclosed area in which all personnel have been informed of the fact that a drone will be flying over them. And something easy that I could think of would be maybe a NASCAR rally. So at a NASCAR rally, they have the little fine print on the tickets, and they have to have it posted everywhere. And basically everybody needs to know upon coming into the venue that there's a possibility of a drone flying overhead. So that's something that I see being implemented fairly quickly. Requires that testing and a declaration of compliance, which will come from the manufacturer. But as individuals, we will be able to submit our own declaration of compliance. But with the fact that there's no established standard of testing yet, it's going to be hard for us to show proof of compliance without that kind of standardized testing. That testing is going to probably require some destructive testing, meaning they're going to crash a bunch of drones in order to prove to the FAA that this does not create more than 11 or 25 foot-pounds of kinetic energy force. So right now, it's not something that a lot of us are going to be able to do. If you're an FPV builder, you are probably going to be able to submit your own declarations of compliance, but that's going to come in the future, probably not right now. But like I said, I see some exciting things in the future based on this information that we've learned. So we talked about Category 1, Category 2, Category 3, and how Category 3, everybody in the enclosed area has to understand that a drone is going to fly over them. The last category is Category 4. And again, if you're a pilot, this is probably going to make a lot more sense. I'm not a real pilot, but there's something called airworthiness, and it has to do with the planes and maintenance of airplanes. So basically, you get a certificate of airworthiness for a new plane. And again, somebody correct me if I'm wrong here. And then from there, there's kind of like a chain of command where all the maintenance and everything is done and recorded and maintained on that airplane in order to keep up that certificate of airworthiness. You'll be able to get that kind of certification for a drone. Now, I'm a little confused on whether the manufacturer will be able to get it. And I think that kind of opens up the door for a type of manufacturer that creates just like Category 4 drones. And with that though, also would include manufacturer required preventative maintenance, PM schedules. So that's not something DJI gives you. There's no like, hey, you need to tear this apart, you need to clean all the rotors and blah, 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 or you need to inspect rotors for damage at periodic intervals, maybe a one weekly or one daily. It would be very easy to create a PM schedule for a drone. So I foresee that being something that we're going to see offered by a lot more drone manufacturers. And it's probably something that if you're dealing with like Predator drones, you know, there already is existing manufacturing or existing manufacturer preventative maintenance schedules available. So I see that being something that opens up some new possibilities in the drone world. And part of what all of this is doing is laying the groundwork for the ability to have those beyond visual line of sight, you know, drones flying all over the sky, delivering your packages and stuff. So I think it's real exciting stuff that we're seeing here. Part of this new rule that allows operations over people will also allow operations over vehicles. And again, this is only part 107, guys. If you're flying recreationally, you can't necessarily do the same things. But it does seem that there's a little more leeway in flying, like transiting over people or over, say, motorways and stuff is going to be a lot easier to do. But again, I think this mostly applies to 107. I don't think that applies to recreational flyers. You still probably aren't supposed to be flying over people. And with that said, I'm not a lawyer. Don't take any of this as a lawyer's advice. All of this is still proposed because it's not like laid in stone yet until it actually gets published in the Federal Register sometime next month. Unmanned operation over vehicles, it's going to be the same rules that apply to Cat 1, 2, and 3, in that you can only do this over Cat 1 and Cat 2. You can only fly this over people without their permission if it's a Cat 1 or Cat 2 situation. If it's a Cat 3 situation, it applies the same rules, where it has to be in an enclosed area and everybody in the area, and especially the people driving the vehicles, understand and know that a drone will be flying overhead. That way it prevents them from doing anything silly or stupid or getting distracted by a drone. That's the main purpose. The other time is if the operation is not within a closed area, but you're just transiting, or it's not sustained flight, meaning you're just periodically going to be over these vehicles. So maybe a good example of that would be a lot of these FPV drift racing videos you see. There's times which the drone is flying over the vehicles, but for the most part, it's not really over the vehicles. Or maybe it is, I don't know. But that's kind of the idea behind that rule. The FAA considers a vehicle to be any means of transportation, regardless of if it's motorized. For example, cars, trucks, buses, trains, motorcycles, scooters, and roller coasters are all vehicles. In addition, non-motorized means of transportation, such as bikes, would also be considered vehicles because they have the potential to move at speeds. Basically, you know, these vehicles move at speeds not contemplated when establishing the requirements for operations over people. So also watercraft, vessels, motorboats, stuff like that also applies as vehicles. This also, I didn't see any change about operations from vehicles, so you still can't really drive and fly the drone at the same time. I don't think that's changed, but those are the major changes announced by the FAA yesterday. So if you have any questions, maybe you interpreted all this differently, maybe you got the same thing I did. If not, let me know in the comments what you think. Thanks for watching, guys. I'm gonna see you next time.